They say trust is like glass. Once it cracks, it's never quite the same. Alyssa and I were supposed to be unbreakable. We had built our life together carefully, one milestone at a time. The whirlwind romance in university, the small wedding with just close family and friends, the cozy house in the suburbs. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. People called us the perfect couple. Every time someone said it, I felt a small surge of pride, but I also wondered if they were seeing something I wasn't. At first, the changes in her were subtle. Alyssa was always busy, but now she seemed preoccupied. There was a distance in her that I couldn't quite put my finger on. We'd always had this rhythm, this easy way of being around each other, like we were still those young kids sneaking kisses during study breaks. But suddenly, our rhythms were out of sync. She'd skip our evening dinners with vague excuses. "Work's been crazy," she'd say, brushing past me with a kiss on the cheek that felt more habitual than loving. Her phone became her constant companion. I'd walk into the room, and she'd quickly lower the screen or set it face down on the table. When I asked, she'd say something casual, just checking emails, or group chat stuff from the office. She smiled when she said it, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. I told myself I was overthinking. It's easy to convince yourself everything's fine when you don't want to face the alternative. The late nights came next. At first, they were once or twice a week. Then they became almost a routine. I'd call her, and she'd answer from what sounded like a bar or a cafe, always laughing. "It's just a quick drink with co-workers," she'd say, promising she wouldn't be long. Sometimes, I'd wait up. More often, I'd fall asleep alone. It wasn't just her absences that stung. It was the moments she was there but not really there. Our conversations used to be endless. We'd talk about everything, from politics to our favorite movies. Now they felt hollow. I'd tell her about something funny that happened at work, and she'd nod absently, scrolling through her phone. I'd ask about her day, and her answers were short, detached. It was like talking to someone who had already left but hadn't bothered to pack their bags yet. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon at a trendy cafe she insisted we try. Alyssa looked radiant in the sunlight streaming through the window, sipping her mimosa like it was just another weekend. Then, out of nowhere, she said it. "I've been thinking, Liam, maybe we should try an open marriage." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "What?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She tilted her head, like she was explaining something obvious. "You know, we've been together so long. It's natural to want to explore other options. Everyone's doing it now." Her tone was casual, as if she were suggesting we redecorate the living room or take a cooking class together. I felt the air leave my lungs. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Alyssa watched me, unbothered, sipping her drink. I searched her face for some hint that she was joking, some trace of the woman I thought I knew. But she was serious. Her expression was calm, even dismissive, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't immediately on board. I managed to choke out, "Is this about someone?" She rolled her eyes, that familiar gesture that had always annoyed me in arguments but now cut deeper. "Don't be ridiculous. This is about us being open, being modern." Her words felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing this speech for weeks, maybe months. I wanted to argue, to tell her how absurd this was, but I couldn't find the words. The woman I had vowed to love and grow old with was sitting across from me, calmly unraveling the life we built. The rest of the lunch was a blur. I barely tasted the food. She acted like nothing had happened, chatting about some office drama while I nodded mechanically. Inside, I was reeling. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Alyssa was next to me, scrolling through her phone, her laughter soft but piercing. I wanted to ask her again, press her, demand answers, but something in her demeanor told me I wouldn't like what I'd hear. Deep down, I already knew. This wasn't just about being open. This was about someone. And I needed to find out who. The night after Alyssa's open marriage proposal, I barely slept. I lay there, my mind racing with a million questions and no clear answers. How long had she been thinking about this? Was there someone specific she was already seeing? Or was this some abstract fantasy she thought would save us from falling into routine? By morning, my exhaustion had morphed into determination. I had to know the truth. Alyssa, on the other hand, seemed utterly unaffected. Over breakfast, she scrolled through her phone, laughing at something. Victor sent the funniest meme yesterday, she said offhandedly. I didn't recognize the name, but it gnawed at me. Who was Victor? Who's Victor? I asked, keeping my tone casual. She barely glanced up. Oh, just a guy from work. He's in the new marketing team. I told you about him. She hadn't. I nodded, hiding my unease. He must be funny if he's got you laughing this early. She shrugged. He's got a great sense of humor. You'd like him. The way she said it felt too practiced, like she was laying the groundwork for something. I didn't press further, but the name stuck with me. That evening, while Alyssa was in the shower, I saw her phone sitting on the counter. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. Trust had always been a cornerstone of our marriage, or so I thought. But trust doesn't survive suspicion, and I was drowning in it. I unlocked her phone using the code I'd seen her enter 100 times. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through her messages, but I couldn't stop. At first, everything seemed normal. Work chats, group texts with friends. Then I found the thread with Victor. It was everything I feared. Flirty messages, inside jokes, plans to meet up. One text stood out, hitting me like a punch to the gut. Can't wait to see you. Liam's been so clingy lately. It's exhausting. Clingy. That's what she called me. I felt a surge of anger and humiliation. I'd been bending over backward to make her happy, to keep our marriage strong, and this was how she saw me? But the worst part was the photos. Some were innocent enough. Selfies, pictures of their lunches. But others were more intimate. Alyssa, smiling in a dress I'd complimented just days ago. A photo of them together at what looked like a bar, his hand resting a little too low on her back. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but a voice in my head stopped me. If I exploded now, she'd twist it, deny it, make me seem irrational. No, I needed a plan. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. Alyssa's behavior made more sense now. The distant conversations, the late nights, the constant phone use. It was all Victor. I started noticing little things I hadn't before. The way she'd smile at her screen, the slight jump when I walked into a room unexpectedly. One evening, she came home later than usual, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong and headed straight for the shower. My stomach churned, but I kept my face neutral. Long day? I called after her. Yeah, crazy busy, she replied. Her voice was light, casual, but I could hear the tension beneath it. I decided to test the waters. Any plans for the weekend? Maybe we could do something together. She paused for a moment, then called back. I think I promised the girls we'd do brunch. Rain check. The girls. Another convenient alibi. I clenched my jaw but forced a smile when she came out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel. That's fine, I said, hiding my growing frustration. We'll figure something out another time. But I knew there wouldn't be another time. Alyssa wasn't just slipping away. She was already gone. The turning point came on a Friday night. Alyssa claimed she was working late, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove to her office, parking a few blocks away. Her car wasn't there. I waited for an hour, then 2. Still nothing. Finally, I texted her. Hey, just checking in. How's work? She replied almost instantly. Still here, just finishing up. Don't wait up for me. I stared at the message, my anger boiling over. She was lying. Without a second thought, I drove to a bar I'd seen mentioned in her messages with Victor. Sure enough, there she was, sitting at a corner table with him. They were laughing, leaning in close, her hand on his arm. For a moment, I just sat there, watching. It felt surreal, like I was an outsider looking in on someone else's life. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the life we'd built together. I left without confronting her. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't ready. Not yet. That night, when Alyssa came home, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped into bed quietly, her back turned to me. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding. The truth was out in the open now, but the game had only just begun. After that night, everything changed for me. The truth was out in the open. Alyssa was lying, betraying, tearing apart our life without even trying to hide it anymore. But for her, nothing seemed different. She acted as if nothing had happened, as if her late-night escapades and secret texts were invisible to me. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee while Alyssa breezed in, humming some tune. She was glowing, wearing one of her favorite robes, hair still damp from her shower. "You're up early," she said with a smile, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I let her, even though it made my skin crawl. "Couldn't sleep," I mumbled. She grabbed a mug and poured herself some coffee, then sat across from me. "Big plans for the day?" Her casual tone felt like a slap. How could she sit there, so nonchalant, after coming home late from meeting Victor? I forced a shrug. "Not really. Figured I'd catch up on some work." "That's good," she said, scrolling through her phone like I wasn't even there. "I might go out for a bit. Karen wants to check out that new yoga studio." Karen. Another convenient excuse. I stared at her, wondering how much of what she said was even true anymore. But I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Alyssa left mid-morning, dressed in leggings and a tank top, her gym bag slung over one shoulder. "Don't wait up," she said with a wink, as if she were heading off to some harmless girl's day. I watched her leave, my fists clenching at my sides. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. I had proof. But I still wasn't ready to confront her. I needed more, something undeniable, something she couldn't twist or excuse. That evening, I decided to take action. As a cybersecurity expert, I knew my way around digital spaces better than most. I logged into her cloud account, using a password I'd seen her type out months ago when she forgot her login. It wasn't hard. Alyssa had always been predictable in that way. What I found hit me like a freight train. Photos, messages, videos. Some were innocent, but others were anything but. One image showed her and Victor sitting on a hotel bed, drinks in hand, the room dimly lit. Another was a selfie she'd taken in lingerie I'd never seen before, sent with the caption, "Can't wait to see you tonight." The messages were worse. Explicit, raw, detailing their plans and fantasies. In one, she complained about me, "Liam's being so moody lately. It's like he knows, but he's too scared to say anything." My hands trembled as I read her words. She didn't just betray me, she mocked me for trusting her, for believing in us. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving. When she came home that night, I was ready. "Hey," she called out as she walked through the door, dropping her bag by the couch. "Sorry I'm late. Yoga ran long, and Karen wanted to grab dinner after." "Who's Victor?" I asked, cutting her off. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. For a moment, she froze, like a deer caught in headlights. Then she recovered, her expression shifting to feigned confusion. "What? Who's Victor?" "You heard me," I said, standing. I grabbed my phone from the table and opened one of the screenshots I'd saved from her messages. I held it up so she could see. "Who is Victor?" Her face paled, but she quickly masked it with anger. "You went through my stuff," she snapped, trying to deflect. "That's such an invasion of privacy, Liam." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "Don't turn this on me. I trusted you. I gave you the benefit of the doubt, and this is what I find? You've been lying to me, Alyssa. For how long?" She crossed her arms, glaring at me. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," I interrupted. "Help me understand how the woman I married could betray me like this." For a moment, she faltered. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her feet. "It's not what you think," she said softly. "It's exactly what I think," I shot back, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around, lying, meeting him behind my back. How long, Alyssa? How long has this been going on?" Her silence was deafening. When she finally looked up, her eyes were cold, her expression defiant. "You don't own me, Liam. You've been so controlling, so clingy. Is it any wonder I wanted something more?" Her words were like a knife to the heart. I stepped back, shaking my head. "Clingy? That's what you call me now? I gave you everything, Alyssa. I supported you, trusted you, and this is what I get." She didn't answer, her jaw set in a stubborn line. Fine, I said, my voice cold. You want something more? Then go. Go to Victor. But don't you dare think you can come back here when he's done with you. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, with something that looked like fear. But she quickly masked it, grabbing her bag and walking to the bedroom without another word. That night, I slept on the couch, my mind racing. This was far from over. Alyssa thought she could brush this off, that she could manipulate her way out of it. But she was wrong. She had chosen her path. Now, I was going to make sure she faced the consequences. The silence in the house the next morning was suffocating. Alyssa stayed in the bedroom while I sat in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind, dissecting every word she'd said, every flicker of her expression. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't even denied it. She'd blamed me. By mid-morning, she emerged, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked like any other day, as if the conversation we had the night before hadn't happened. I couldn't decide if her calm was calculated or if she genuinely thought she could just sweep this under the rug. "Morning," she said, grabbing a mug and pouring herself coffee. Her tone was neutral, almost light, like we were two colleagues avoiding a difficult topic at work. I didn't reply. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around the mug, her eyes avoiding mine. "So I've been thinking," she began, her voice careful. "Last night was intense. Maybe we should take some time to cool off and talk things through later. We don't need to rush into any decisions." "Decisions like what?" I asked, finally looking up at her. "Like, what happens next?" she said, her words slow and deliberate. "What happens next is you pack a bag and leave," I said bluntly. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine fear. But then her expression hardened. "I'm not going anywhere, Liam. This is my house too." "This was our house," I corrected. "You decided to make it yours when you brought Victor into our marriage." She opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to calculate her next move. Finally, she let out a bitter laugh. "You're really going to throw everything away over this? Over one mistake?" I leaned forward, my voice cold. "Don't you dare call this a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to lock the front door. What you did was a choice. You chose to lie, to sneak around, to humiliate me." Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "I didn't humiliate you. No one knows about this but us." Her words sent a fresh wave of anger through me. "You think this is about saving face? You think I care what people know? This is about what you did to me. To us." She stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a screech. "I'm done with this conversation," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll be in my office if you want to talk like an adult." I watched her leave, my hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just denial, it was arrogance. She thought she could dictate the terms, control the narrative. But she was wrong. I spent the next few days preparing. I didn't tell her what I was doing or why I was staying so quiet. I needed her to think I was backing down, that I was too defeated to fight back. In reality, I was gathering evidence. Using my skills in cybersecurity, I accessed more of her communications with Victor. Their texts were a goldmine of incriminating details. Plans for their next rendezvous, jokes about me, even discussions about using our joint accounts for their hotel stays. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. I also started digging into Victor's background. It didn't take long to uncover some interesting details. Financial troubles, workplace complaints, even a few skeletons in his closet that he'd probably hoped would never see the light of day. Alyssa had chosen him over me. Fine. But I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. The opportunity to act came sooner than I expected. One evening, Alyssa announced that she had a work dinner and would be home late. I knew exactly where she was going. As soon as she left, I grabbed my laptop and began setting my plan in motion. Using the access I had to her cloud account, I sent several of her most damning messages to a trusted friend of mine, someone with connections in the legal world. I wasn't just angry, I was preparing for the fallout. Around midnight, she came home, smelling faintly of wine and something I didn't want to name. She slipped into bed without a word, her back to me. I stared at the ceiling, my resolve hardening with every second. The next morning, I got up early and called a lawyer. "Mr. Callahan, I've reviewed your case," the lawyer said later that day, after I'd shared the evidence I'd collected. "This is extensive. With this kind of documentation, you could secure a favorable divorce settlement. You might even have grounds for additional action against your wife's paramour." The words hit me like a cold splash of water. Divorce. The word felt heavy, final. But what choice did I have? Alyssa had made her decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. That evening, I told her. "We're done," I said as she sat across from me at the dinner table, picking at her salad. She looked up, startled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "I've already contacted a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them soon." Her fork clattered against her plate. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." She opened her mouth to argue, but I stood before she could speak. "Don't try to talk your way out of this, Alyssa. You've already said enough." As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief. This wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but it was the one she'd chosen. And I was finally ready to move on. Alyssa didn't take the news of the divorce quietly. I had expected anger, maybe some denial, but what I got was a mix of manipulation and blame-shifting that left me more certain than ever that I was making the right decision. "You're being ridiculous," she said that night, her voice laced with disbelief. "Throwing everything away over something so small?" "Liam, I was just trying to feel alive again. You've been so distant these past few years." Her words stopped me cold. "Distant," I repeated, turning to face her. "You're blaming me for your affair?" "It's not an affair," she snapped, folding her arms defensively. "It's complicated. You don't understand." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You're right, Alyssa. I don't understand. I don't understand how the woman I married, the woman I thought I knew, could lie to my face for months. I don't understand how you can sit there and act like this is my fault." She sighed, exasperated, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "People grow apart, Liam. That's just how life works." I was trying to find a way for us to stay together while also giving us some freedom. "Freedom?" I shot back. "You mean the freedom to sleep with someone else while keeping me as your safety net?" Her expression darkened, her composure slipping. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she said, her voice quieter now. "It just happened." "Things don't just happen," I said firmly. "You chose this, Alyssa. You chose him." For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Her lip quivered, and her eyes glistened. But then, just as quickly, her defenses went back up. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said coldly. "Do you really want to destroy our lives over one mistake?" "There it is again," I said, stepping closer. "You keep calling this a mistake, like it was some accident. But it wasn't. You knew exactly what you were doing." She stayed silent, her jaw tight. "Victor's not some random guy you tripped into bed with," I continued. "You planned this. You lied to me, over and over, to cover your tracks. That's not a mistake, Alyssa. That's a choice." She looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. "What do you want me to say, Liam? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. But do you really want to throw away everything we've built together because of this?" "Everything we've built?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You already threw it away. The moment you decided to let someone else into our marriage, you destroyed everything we had." Her face twisted with anger. "You're not perfect, Liam," she said sharply. "You've made mistakes too. Don't act like you're some saint." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her words. "What mistakes, Alyssa? What have I done that compares to what you've done?" She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again, realizing she had no answer. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to leave," I said, my voice steady. "Pack your things and go. You can stay with Victor or Karen, or whoever else you want. But you can't stay here." Her eyes widened in shock. "You can't be serious. This is my home too. It was our home, I said firmly. Not anymore. She didn't move, her eyes locked on mine as if trying to gauge whether I meant it. When she saw the resolve in my expression, she shook her head, a bitter smile on her lips. You'll regret this, she said softly. No, I replied, meeting her gaze. I'll regret not doing it sooner. She stormed off, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I had expected to feel something, guilt, sadness, maybe even doubt. But all I felt was relief. This was the beginning of the end, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and quiet standoffs. Alyssa didn't leave right away, of course. She lingered in the house like a ghost, her presence a constant reminder of the betrayal I was trying to process. It was as if she didn't believe I'd go through with it, that I'd change my mind and beg her to stay. But I didn't. Instead, I focused on preparing for what was to come. I spoke with my lawyer almost daily, gathering the paperwork, ensuring I had all the evidence I needed to make this process as smooth and as final as possible. Alyssa, meanwhile, seemed to exist in her own little world, alternating between icy silence and sharp jabs meant to provoke me. You know, she said one evening as she folded laundry in the living room, Victor actually listens to me. He doesn't make me feel small, like you do. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I replied calmly, that's good, Alyssa. I'm sure he'll enjoy listening to you when you're living in his apartment. Her mouth tightened into a thin line, but she didn't respond. That night, I decided it was time to confront Victor directly. Not in person. I wasn't about to stoop to some dramatic showdown in a parking lot. No, I had a better plan. I still had access to Alyssa's phone account, and through it, I had found Victor's number. I sent him a text. Victor, this is Liam, Alyssa's husband. We need to talk. It didn't take long for him to reply. His message was short, almost smug. Not sure what there is to talk about, but okay. We agreed to meet the next evening at a coffee shop near his office. I didn't tell Alyssa. When I arrived, Victor was already there, sitting in a corner booth. He looked exactly like the photos I'd seen, tall, athletic, with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He gave me a casual nod as I approached, like we were old friends catching up. Liam, right? He said, standing to shake my hand. I didn't take it. Let's skip the pleasantries, I said, sitting down across from him. His smile faltered, but only for a moment. He leaned back in his seat, spreading his arms like he owned the place. All right. What do you want to talk about? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. You've been seeing my wife. He didn't even blink. She told me you knew, he said casually, that you were okay with it. A surge of anger shot through me, but I pushed it down. That's a lie, I said evenly. And you know it. He shrugged, his confidence unwavering. Look man, I get it. You're upset. But Alyssa and we have something real. She's not happy with you, and that's not my fault. The arrogance in his tone made my fists clench under the table. You think this is about her not being happy? I said, my voice cold. This is about the lies, the betrayal. You didn't just sleep with my wife, Victor. You conspired with her to destroy our marriage. His smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. Look, I didn't come here to fight. If Alyssa wants to be with me, that's her choice. You need to accept that and move on. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. You don't understand what you've stepped into, do you? I have every text, every photo, every receipt. I've already filed for divorce, and you can bet your name is going to come up in that paperwork. Do you have any idea what that's going to do to your reputation? For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the court case, I said. The financial implications, the public fallout. You think Alyssa is going to stand by you when this all blows up? You're a fantasy to her, Victor. A distraction. When the reality hits, you'll see how quickly she cuts you loose. He didn't respond. His confident facade was cracking, and I pressed on. You've built your life on a foundation of lies, Victor, I said. But the truth has a way of catching up to people like you. I stood, tossing a few bills onto the table to cover my coffee. Enjoy your time with Alyssa, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. It won't last. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Victor might not have crumbled under my words, but I had planted a seed of doubt. And that was enough for now. When I got home, Alyssa was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, her expression unreadable. "Where were you?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Taking care of business." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. The storm was far from over, but I was ready to face it head-on. The morning after my meeting with Victor, Alyssa was unusually quiet. She moved through the house like a shadow, her presence muted and cautious. It was a stark contrast to her usual sharp remarks and casual arrogance. I didn't ask if she knew about my conversation with her lover. I didn't need to. She waited until lunch to finally speak. "Liam," she said hesitantly, standing in the doorway of my home office. "Can we talk?" I didn't look up from my computer. "What is it?" She hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. I think we've both said things in the heat of the moment. Maybe we should take a step back and figure out how to fix this." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Her tone was softer than usual, almost pleading. It was the closest thing to vulnerability I'd seen from her in months. But I wasn't falling for it. "Fix what, Alyssa?" I asked calmly. "Our marriage, or your relationship with Victor?" Her expression tightened, the mask slipping for a moment. "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You know it's more complicated than that." "Complicated?" I repeated, standing. "You're right, Alyssa. It is complicated. You've turned our marriage into a three-person circus, and now you want to play victim." She flinched, but quickly recovered. "I'm not playing victim," she said, her voice firm. "I'm trying to take responsibility for my actions." "By lying? By sneaking around?" I countered. "You're not taking responsibility, Alyssa. You're trying to manipulate me into letting you off the hook." Her face flushed with anger. "I'm trying to save our marriage, Liam. Don't you see that?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You don't want to save our marriage. You want to save yourself. There's a difference." The silence between us was heavy, charged with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, she broke it. "Do you even want to fix this?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I had married. I saw a stranger, someone who had chosen lies and betrayal over the life we had built together. "No," I said simply. "I don't." Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then her expression hardened, the vulnerability replaced by anger. "Fine," she said coldly. "If that's how you feel, then there's nothing left to say." She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stared after her, my chest tight with a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and an anger that burned hotter than ever. That evening, Alyssa packed a suitcase and left. She didn't tell me where she was going, and I didn't ask. It was obvious she was heading to Victor's. The house felt eerily quiet without her. For the first time in years, I was alone, truly alone. And while part of me felt an aching sadness, another part felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. I used the time to finalize my preparations. With Alyssa gone, I had full access to everything she'd left behind. Emails, bank statements, even her planner. What I found only confirmed what I already knew. The money she'd been siphoning from our joint accounts wasn't just for hotels and dinners. She had been funding Victor's lifestyle, paying off his credit card debts, covering his rent when he'd fallen behind. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial. I documented everything, adding it to the growing file I had shared with my lawyer. The case against Alyssa was airtight, and I was determined to use every piece of evidence to protect myself in the divorce proceedings. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Liam," a woman's voice said. "This is Emily, Victor's ex-girlfriend." Her name caught me off guard. I'd heard about Emily from the messages I'd found, how Victor had ended things with her shortly after meeting Alyssa. "What do you want?" I asked cautiously. "I think we need to talk," she said. "About Victor. And Alyssa." I frowned, unsure of her intentions. Why now? Because you're not the only one he's hurt, she said bitterly. And I think we can help each other. We agreed to meet at a cafe later that afternoon. When I arrived, Emily was already waiting. She was younger than I'd expected, with tired eyes that hinted at the toll Victor had taken on her. Thanks for meeting me, she said as I sat down. Cut to the chase, I said, not in the mood for small talk. She nodded, pulling out a folder and sliding it across the table. This is everything I have on Victor. Financial records, emails, even some recordings. He's a liar, Liam. A manipulator. And if Alyssa thinks she's special, she's in for a rude awakening. I opened the folder and quickly skimmed the contents. It was damning. Proof of Victor's pattern of using women for financial and professional gain before discarding them. Why are you giving this to me? I asked, looking up at her. Because I want him to face consequences, she said simply. And because I know what it feels like to be betrayed. I nodded, tucking the folder into my bag. Thank you. As I walked out of the cafe, a plan began to form in my mind. Alyssa and Victor had underestimated me. They thought they could lie, cheat, and manipulate without facing the fallout. But they were wrong. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, and making sure they couldn't destroy anyone else's. The information Emily handed me was a game changer. Victor wasn't just a homewrecker, he was a con artist. He had a pattern of targeting women in vulnerable positions, using their resources to pull himself out of trouble, and then moving on to his next victim. The fact that Alyssa had fallen for him made my stomach churn, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. I spent the next few days meticulously organizing the evidence. Between what Emily had given me and the digital trail Alyssa had left behind, I had more than enough to expose their affair and dismantle their fragile house of cards. On a Wednesday evening, I called Alyssa. She didn't pick up, so I sent a text. I need you to come by the house tomorrow evening. There are things we need to finalize for the divorce. Her reply came minutes later. Fine. 7 p.m. When Thursday rolled around, I made sure everything was in place. My lawyer had advised me not to confront Alyssa without a witness, so I asked my friend Greg to be there. Greg was one of the few people I'd confided in about what was happening. He was more than willing to back me up. Alyssa arrived right on time. She stepped into the house, her expression guarded but composed. She wore a fitted blazer and heels, her usual look when she wanted to appear in control. "What's this about?" she asked, glancing at Greg before turning her gaze to me. "Have a seat," I said, gesturing to the dining table. She sat down, crossing her arms. "I don't see why he's here," she said, nodding toward Greg. "He's here to make sure this goes smoothly," I said. "I think you'll understand why soon enough." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. I placed a folder on the table in front of her. "These are copies of everything I've gathered about your affair with Victor. The texts, the photos, the financial records. It's all here." Her face paled, but she quickly masked her shock with defiance. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted. "You've been using our joint accounts to fund his lifestyle. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And now, you're going to face the consequences." She stared at me, her jaw tight. "What do you want, Liam? Is this about money? Revenge? What are you trying to prove?" I leaned forward, my voice cold. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm making sure you can't weasel your way out of this. I've already filed for divorce. My lawyer has all this evidence, and you'll be hearing from him soon." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she leaned back in her chair, letting out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won, don't you? You think this is some big victory?" "This isn't about winning," I said evenly. "It's about accountability. Something you and Victor clearly don't understand." At the mention of Victor, her composure cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes darted toward the folder. "You don't know anything about him," she said defensively. "I know enough," I replied, pulling out another folder. This one contained the documents Emily had given me. "Here's a little bonus for you. A detailed history of Victor's extracurricular activities. Turns out, you're not the first woman he's used, Alyssa. And you won't be the last." Her hand trembled as she reached for the folder. She flipped through the pages, her face growing paler with each one. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking. "That's not true," she said weakly. This can't be true." "Oh, it's true," I said. "You think he loves you? You're just another Mark to him. Another name on a long list of women he's lied to and used." She slammed the folder shut, her eyes blazing with anger. "You're lying. You're just trying to manipulate me." I shrugged. "Believe what you want. But don't say I didn't warn you when he moves on to his next victim." Alyssa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over, Liam," she hissed. "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "You just don't realize it yet." She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Greg let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Well, that was intense," he said. I nodded, sinking into a chair. "It's far from over," I said. "But it's a start." Over the next few weeks, the fallout was swift and brutal. My lawyer filed the divorce papers, and the evidence against Alyssa was overwhelming. She tried to play the victim, claiming I was overreacting, but no one bought her story, not with the mountain of proof I had. As for Victor, his carefully curated image began to crumble. Emily had sent her evidence to his workplace, and the details of his past began to circulate. He was forced to resign, and from what I heard, his reputation was in tatters. Alyssa, too, faced the consequences of her choices. Friends she thought would support her distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with the scandal. Even her family, who had once adored her, expressed their disappointment. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The storm was finally starting to pass. Life after Alyssa left felt strange at first. The house, once filled with the hum of daily routines and shared conversations, was now eerily quiet. But the silence wasn't unwelcome, it was peaceful. For the first time in years, I could think clearly without walking on eggshells or wondering what new lie was being spun behind my back. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence my lawyer presented. Alyssa didn't have much ground to stand on, and her initial defiance gave way to resignation. She fought for a few things out of spite, some furniture, the car we had bought together, but in the end, it was a clean break. She didn't apologize. Not once. Even when everything was laid bare, she clung to her narrative of being misunderstood, of seeking something she wasn't getting from our marriage. It hurt, but I'd stopped expecting closure from her. Sometimes, the people who hurt you the most are the least capable of giving you what you need. Victor, on the other hand, was unraveling. Emily and I kept in touch sporadically, and she updated me on the fallout from her side. After being forced to resign, Victor tried to reach out to her, likely hoping to rekindle their relationship now that Alyssa's resources were no longer available. Emily, to her credit, didn't even entertain the idea. "He's a parasite," she said during one of our conversations. "And he's finally run out of hosts." One evening, about a month after Alyssa moved out, she called me. Seeing her name on my phone made my chest tighten, but I answered. "What do you want, Alyssa?" I asked, my tone flat. There was a long pause before she spoke. I wanted to check in," she said, her voice hesitant. "Check in," I repeated, disbelief lacing my words. "After everything you've done, you think we can have casual conversations now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess I thought we could talk. Maybe start over, as friends." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Friends? Alyssa, we weren't even partners by the end of our marriage. You destroyed any foundation we had. There's no starting over." Her voice hardened. "You act like I'm the only one to blame, Liam. You were distant, cold. You didn't even notice when I was unhappy." "I noticed," I said sharply. "I noticed you pulling away. I noticed the lies, the late nights, the phone you couldn't put down. What I didn't do was give up on us the way you did." Another long silence stretched between us. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I'm sorry." It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, not the raw, heartfelt admission that might have brought some closure. It was an afterthought, an attempt to soothe her guilt rather than heal the damage she had done. "Goodbye, Alyssa," I said, ending the call. Hanging up felt like closing a chapter I'd been stuck in for too long. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I poured myself into work, took up running again, and even reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again. One evening, I attended a small get-together hosted by Greg and his wife. It was a casual affair. Grilled burgers, cold beers, and the warm chatter of friends. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed this until I was there, laughing at Greg's terrible jokes and catching up with people who genuinely cared about me. That's where I met Grace. She was a friend of Greg's wife, a teacher with a quick wit and a smile that lit up the room. We struck up a conversation over drinks, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful. Grace was different. She didn't pry about my past or offer empty platitudes. She was grounded, honest, and refreshingly genuine. By the end of the night, I found myself smiling in a way I hadn't in months. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we started talking. At first, it was casual, texts about random things, the occasional phone call. But as time went on, it became clear that there was something deeper there. One evening, as we sat on a park bench overlooking the water, I opened up about everything. The betrayal, the divorce, the anger and pain I'd carried for so long. Grace listened quietly, her hand resting lightly on mine. When I finished, she squeezed my hand gently. "You've been through a lot," she said softly. "But it doesn't define you. You're still here, still standing. That says more about you than anything else." Her words stayed with me long after that night. As the months passed, my life began to take shape again. The divorce was finalized, and Alyssa faded into the background of my memories. A painful chapter, but not the whole story. Grace and I grew closer, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something real, something honest. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "You know, I think you're going to be okay." For the first time in a long time, I believed her. Months turned into a year, and life began to feel steady again. The scars from my marriage to Alyssa were still there, but they no longer defined me. They had become a part of my story, a reminder of what I had endured and the strength I had found to move forward. Alyssa tried to contact me a few more times, but I ignored her messages. Each attempt felt less like regret and more like a bid for attention, a way to keep me tethered to her even as she continued to spiral. I didn't need her apologies or her explanations anymore. The chapter was closed. Victor disappeared from the picture not long after the divorce was finalized. Emily told me he had tried to rekindle things with her one last time, but she shut him down. The last she'd heard, he had left town, running from the mess he'd created. Good riddance. As for Grace, she became more than just a new chapter in my life. She became a partner, someone who truly understood me in a way Alyssa never had. With Grace, there were no games, no secrets, just an honest connection that grew stronger with each passing day. One weekend, we went hiking at a nearby nature reserve. It was something she loved, and I found myself enjoying it more than I expected. As we reached the top of a hill overlooking a breathtaking valley, she turned to me, her eyes bright with excitement. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she asked. I nodded, but my gaze was on her. "Yeah," I said. "It really is." In that moment, I realized how far I'd come. A year ago, I was drowning in betrayal and anger, convinced that my life had been irreparably shattered. But standing there with Grace, feeling the crisp air on my face and her hand in mine, I knew that life had a way of surprising you. Not everything Alyssa and I built was gone. I still had memories, lessons, and a clearer sense of what I deserved in a relationship. And most importantly, I had my dignity, something no amount of betrayal could take from me. That evening, as Grace and I sat by the fire pit in her backyard, she rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you came into my life, Liam," she said quietly. I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I'm glad you didn't run the other way when you heard my story," I replied with a small laugh. She tilted her head to look up at me, her expression serious. "Your story isn't something to run from, Liam. It's a testament to how strong you are. And I feel lucky to be a part of where it's going next." Her words stayed with me long after the fire burned down to embers. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by the past or anxious about the future. I was present, content, and at peace with the man I had become. Life doesn't always go the way you plan. People you trust can betray you. Love can falter. But if you're willing to face the pain, to fight through it, there's something on the other side. something worth living for. I had found that something in Grace, in the life we were building together. And for the first time, I wasn't looking back. The vows Alyssa and I had made might have crumbled, but my story didn't end with her betrayal. It was just the beginning of something new, something better, and I was ready for it.